Let's take a moment to talk about the anatomy of a marker nib. There are essentially three different types of marker nibs. You have what's called a round nib, which creates a monoline, which means any line, no matter which way you point it, no matter how much pressure you use, will always be the same type of line. And that's because the tip of the nib is rounded. So great for lefties, great for working fast and wanting to get everything down quickly. It comes in two different markers. It comes in the number 1 round and also the FineOne round. The round nib. Then we have what's called the brush nib. And the brush nib, we have a little bit more anatomy because we have what's called the broad edge of the brush nib and the tip. So remember, broad edge, I'll be using these terms as we go through these videos, and tip. The entire part of this is called the nib. So you'll hear me talk about tip, which is the very top. This is also the tip, and that's of the entire nib. And the brush marker makes a very special line. It can go thick and thin, even when it goes around curves, and you can go thin and thin again. So it's kind of fun to make different shapes with it. It's fun to draw with. So it's going to have a varied line. And this marker comes in the number 1, the twin one on this side has a brush nib, and also the FineOne, which is a very long and narrow nib. And just really quickly, I want to show you all three of these nibs so that you can see them side by side. Right? So you have more of a long skinny nib, this is a very much narrow nib, and this is a very long and narrow nib. Oops. And sometimes you can't always let it dry. So that comes in the number 1, it comes in the twin one, and it comes in the FineOne brush nib. And then the next nib is called the wedge or the chisel. The twin one is a chisel nib, which means that it has a very narrow, broad edge to it compared to the number 1. So what do I mean by that? Remember, the broad edge is the part that is the widest part of the marker. Then we have, this is the tip, but there's also a broad edge of the tip, and then there's like a corner of a tip, and then finally this down here is called the heel. So this marker can create several different shapes. You've got the broad edge, you've got the tip, and then you've also got the heel. And the heel, the ink doesn't always flow as much on the heel of the nib, so sometimes you have to warm it up. But you can get 3 and 4 if you go at a corner. You can get 4 different stroke widths using this marker. And it's available in the big one. So same goes for the big one. Broad, at a corner, the tip, this one's almost running out of ink, and the heel. Again, this comes in the number 1, the twin one, and the big one. And a marker that is very similar to this but doesn't have a chiseled or a mitered edge is the fat one. And a few other similar markers that have a broad edge are the fat one, the chalk one, and the acrylic one. And you'll notice that all three of these have a broad edge, and there's also a narrow edge that you can work with, and I share how to do these in some of the more advanced lettering styles. Again, a broad edge, and there's a little bit of a miter there that I use when I'm using the broad edge of the marker, and the same goes for the acrylic one. So those come in the fat one, and the fat one comes in 30 millimeter and 50 millimeter. The chalk one and the acrylic large markers. So it has a broad edge, and there is an edge on the sides, but we use them in different ways. So there you have it, the anatomy of a marker nib. When considering the round, the brush, the chisel or wedge, or the broad edge flat markers, know that any of the markers that we have completely align with the different calligraphy pens that are out there, so any letter that's made in calligraphy can be made with our markers. If you'd like to learn more about the tools of the trade, check out my new book, Lettering Journey, available in color from Neuland or from my website in black and white.